It is a pleasure to have you with us at the English Story Journal. Grab a coffee, find a quiet spot, and let's get lost in the story. Alice was getting very tired of sitting by her sister on the bank. She had nothing to do. Once or twice she looked into the book her sister was reading, but it had no pictures or conversations. And what is the use of a book, thought Alice, without pictures or conversations? She was thinking, the hot day made her feel sleepy, if making a daisy chain was worth the effort of picking flowers. Suddenly, a white rabbit with pink eyes ran close by her. Alice did not think it strange to hear the rabbit say to itself, oh dear, I shall be late." But then the rabbit took a watch out of its waistcoat pocket, looked at it, and hurried on. Alice jumped up. She had never seen a rabbit with a waistcoat pocket or a watch. Very curious, she ran across the field after it. She was just in time to see it go down a large rabbit hole under the hedge. In another moment, Alice went down after it. She did not think about how she would get out again. The rabbit hole went straight like a tunnel for some way, then it dipped down suddenly. It was so sudden that Alice had no time to stop herself. She found herself falling down a very deep well. The well was very deep, or she fell very slowly. She had a lot of time as she went down to look around. She wondered what would happen next. First, she tried to look down to see what was at the bottom, but it was too dark. Then she looked at the sides of the well. She saw cupboards and bookshelves. Here and there she saw maps and pictures. She took a jar from one of the shelves as she passed. It was labeled orange marmalade, but it was empty. She did not want to drop the jar and hurt someone below, so she put it into a cupboard as she fell past it. Well, thought Alice to herself, after such a fall as this, I shall think nothing of tumbling downstairs. How brave they'll all think me at home. Why, I wouldn't say anything about it, even if I fell off the top of the house. Down, down, down. Would the fall never end? I wonder how many miles I've fallen by this time, she said aloud. I must be getting somewhere near the center of the earth. Let me see. That would be 4,000 miles down, I think. Alice had learned about this in school. Even though no one was listening, it was good to practice. Yes, that's about the right distance. But then I wonder what latitude or longitude I've got to. Alice did not know what latitude or longitude meant, but she thought they were big words to say. Then she began again. I wonder if I shall fall right through the earth. How funny it'll seem to come out among the people that walk with their heads downward. The antipathies, I think. She was happy no one heard her say antipathies because it did not sound right. But I shall have to ask them what the name of the country is, you know. Please, ma'am, is this New Zealand or Australia? She tried to curtsy as she spoke. And what an ignorant little girl she'll think me for asking. No, it'll never do to ask. Perhaps I shall see it written up somewhere. Down, down, down. There was nothing else to do, so Alice soon began talking again. Dinah'll miss me very much tonight, I should think. Dinah was the cat. I hope they'll remember her saucer of milk at tea time. Dinah, my dear, I wish you were down here with me. There are no mice in the air, I'm afraid, but you might catch a bat, and that's very like a mouse, you know. But do cats eat bats, I wonder? Alice began to get sleepy. She kept saying to herself in a sleepy voice, Do cats eat bats? Do cats eat bats? And sometimes, do bats eat cats? She could not answer either question, so it did not matter which way she said it. She felt she was falling asleep. She had just begun to dream that she was walking hand in hand with Dinah and saying to her very seriously, "Now, Dinah, tell me the truth. Did you ever eat a bat?" Suddenly, thump, thump, she landed on a pile of sticks and dry leaves. The fall was over. Alice was not hurt. She jumped up at once. She looked up, but it was dark above. Before her was another long passage. The White Rabbit was still in sight, hurrying down it. There was no time to lose. Alice ran very fast and was just in time to hear it say as it turned a corner, "Oh, my ears and whiskers, how late it's getting!" She was close behind it when she turned the corner, but the rabbit was gone. She found herself in a long, low hall, lit by lamps hanging from the ceiling. There were doors all around the hall, but they were all locked. Alice walked down one side and up the other, trying every door. Then she walked sadly down the middle, wondering how she would ever get out. Suddenly, she saw a little three-legged table, all made of glass. There was nothing on it except a tiny golden key. Alice first thought it might belong to one of the hall doors, but the key was too small for any of the locks. On her second time around, she saw a low curtain she had not noticed before. Behind it was a little door about 15 inches high. She tried the little golden key in the lock, and to her great delight, it fitted. Alice opened the door. It led into a small passage, not much bigger than a rat hole. She knelt down and looked along the passage. She saw the most beautiful garden. How she wanted to leave that dark hall and walk among the bright flowers and cool fountains, but she could not even get her head through the doorway. "And even if my head would go through," thought poor Alice, "it would be of very little use without my shoulders. Oh, how I wish I could shut up like a telescope. I think I could, if I only knew how to begin." So many strange things had happened lately that Alice thought anything was possible. There was no use waiting by the little door, so she went back to the table. She hoped to find another key or maybe a book of rules for shutting people up like telescopes. This time she found a little bottle on it, which certainly was not here before, said Alice. Around the bottle's neck was a paper label with the words, "Drink me," printed in large letters. It was easy to say, "Drink me," but wise little Alice was not going to do that quickly. "No, I'll look first," she said, "and see whether it's marked poison or not." She had read stories about children who got hurt because they didn't follow simple rules. For example, a hot poker will burn you if you hold it too long, and if you cut your finger deeply with a knife, it usually bleeds. She never forgot that if you drink from a bottle marked poison, it will almost certainly make you sick sooner or later. However, this bottle was not marked poison, so Alice tried a taste. It was very nice. It tasted like cherry tart, custard, pineapple, roast turkey, toffee, and hot buttered toast. She very soon finished it all. "What a curious feeling," said Alice. "I must be shutting up like a telescope." And it was true. She was now only 10 inches high. She was happy because she was now the right size to go through the little door into that lovely garden. But first, she waited a few minutes to see if she would shrink more. She felt a little nervous. "For it might end, you know," said Alice to herself, rather sharply. "I advise you to leave off this minute." She often gave herself good advice, though she very seldom followed it. Sometimes she scolded herself so strongly that it made her cry. She once thought about hitting herself for cheating in a game of croquet she played alone. This curious child liked to pretend she was two people. But it's no use now, thought poor Alice, to pretend to be two people. Why, there's hardly enough of me left to make one respectable person. Soon her eye saw a little glass box under the table. She opened it and found a very small cake. The words, "Eat me," were clearly on it, made with currants. "Well, I'll eat it," said Alice, "and if it makes me grow larger, I can reach the key. And if it makes me grow smaller, I can creep under the door. So either way, I'll get into the garden, and I don't care which happens." She ate a little bit. She said worriedly to herself, "Which way? Which way?" She held her head on her head to feel if she was growing. She was quite surprised to find that she stayed the same size. This usually happens when one eats cake, but Alice had seen so many strange things happen that it felt boring for nothing to change. So she started to eat and very soon finished the cake. "Curiouser and curiouser," cried Alice. She was so surprised she forgot good English. "Now I'm opening out like the largest telescope ever. Goodbye, feet." She looked down, and her feet seemed very far away. "Oh, my poor feet! Who will put on your shoes and stockings now? I'm sure I won't be able. I'll be too far away to think about you. You must manage the best way you can. But I must be kind to them," Alice thought, "or they won't walk where I want. I'll give them new boots every Christmas." She thought how she would manage it. "They must go by the mail," she thought. "How funny it will seem, sending gifts to her own feet. Alice's right foot, Esquire, hearth rug, near the fender, with Alice's love. Oh dear, what silly things I'm saying." Just then her head hit the roof of the hall. She was now more than 9 feet tall. She picked up the key and hurried to the garden door. Poor Alice! She lay on her side to look into the garden. Getting through was harder. She sat down and started to cry again. "You ought to be ashamed of yourself," said Alice. "A big girl like you to cry like this? Stop this moment, I tell you." But she kept crying many tears. Soon a large pool formed all around her, 4 inches deep and reaching halfway down the hall. After a while, she heard small steps. She dried her eyes. It was the White Rabbit returning. He was dressed with white kid gloves in one hand and a fan in the other. He came running very fast, muttering to himself, "Oh, the Duchess, the Duchess! Oh, won't she be angry if I've kept her waiting?" Alice felt sad she wanted help, so when the rabbit came near, she began, in a low, quiet voice, "If you please, sir." The rabbit jumped, dropped the gloves and fan, and ran away as fast as he could. Alice picked up the fan and gloves. The hall was hot, so she fanned herself while talking. "Dear, dear, how strange everything is today. And yesterday things were just as usual. I wonder if I've changed in the night. Was I the same when I got up this morning? I almost think I remember feeling different. But if I'm not the same, the next question is, who am I? Ah, that's the big puzzle." She started thinking about all the children she knew who were her age. She wanted to see if she had changed into one of them. "I'm sure I'm not Ada," she said, "for her hair is in long curls and mine doesn't have curls at all. And I can't be Mabel, for I know many things, and she knows so little. Besides, she's she, and I'm I, and oh dear, how puzzling it all is. I'll try if I know all the things I used to know. Let me see. 4 times 5 is 12, and 4 times 6 is 13, and 4 times 7 is... Oh dear, I will never get to 20 at that rate. The multiplication table doesn't matter. Let's try geography. London is the capital of Paris, and Paris is the capital of Rome, and Rome... No, that's all wrong, I'm sure. I must have changed into Mabel. I'll try and say, how doth the little... She crossed her hands on her lap like she was doing lessons. She began to repeat it, but her voice sounded rough and strange. The words were not the same as they used to be. How doth the little crocodile improve his shining tail, and pour the waters of the Nile on every golden scale? How cheerfully he seems to grin, how neatly spread his claws, and welcome little fishes in with gently smiling jaws. I'm sure those are not the right words, said poor Alice. Her eyes filled with tears again. I must be Mabel after all, and I shall have to go and live in that small house and have almost no toys to play with, and oh, so many lessons to learn. No, I've decided about it. If I'm Mabel, I'll stay down here. It will be no use for them to put their heads down and say, "Come up again, dear." I will only look up and say, "Who am I then? Tell me that first. And then, if I like being that person, I'll come up. If not, I'll stay down here till I'm somebody else." But oh dear, cried Alice, suddenly bursting into tears. I do wish they would put their heads down. I am so very tired of being all alone here. As she said this, she looked down at her hands. She was surprised to see that she had put on one of the rabbit's white kid gloves while she was talking. How can I have done that? She thought. I must be growing small again. She went to the table to measure herself. She found she was now 2 feet tall and shrinking fast. She soon found out the fan she was holding was causing this. She dropped it quickly, just in time to stop shrinking completely. That was a close escape, said Alice. She was scared by the change, but happy to be alive. And now for the garden. She ran very fast back to the little door, but sadly, the little door was shut again. The key was on the glass table as before. And things are worse than ever, thought the poor child, for I was never this small before, never. And I say it's too bad, it truly is. As she said these words, her foot slipped, and in another moment, splash, she was up to her chin in salty water. Her first thought was she had fallen into the sea. She soon realized she was in the pool of tears she had cried when 9 feet tall. I wish I hadn't cried so much, said Alice as she swam around, trying to find a way out. I will be punished for it now, I guess, by drowning in my own tears. That will be a strange thing for sure, but everything is strange today. Just then she heard splashing in the pool. She swam nearer to see what it was. At first she thought it must be a walrus or hippopotamus, but then she remembered her small size. She soon saw it was only a mouse that had slipped in, like her. Would it be useful, thought Alice, to speak to this mouse? Everything is so out of the way down here, it can probably talk. No harm in trying. So she began, "Oh, mouse, do you know the way out of this pool? I am very tired of swimming here, oh mouse." The mouse looked at her with a question, winked with one eye, but said nothing. Perhaps it doesn't understand English, thought Alice. I dare say it's a French mouse. So she began again. Où est ma chatte? This was the first sentence in her French lesson book. The mouse gave a sudden jump out of the water and seemed to shake all over with fear. Oh, I beg your pardon, cried Alice quickly, afraid that she had hurt the poor animal's feelings. I quite forgot you didn't like cats. Not like cats, cried the mouse in a loud, angry voice. Would you like cats if you were me? Well, Perhaps not, said Alice in a soft voice. Don't be angry. I wish I could show you our cat Dinah. I think you'd like cats if you could only see her. She is such a dear, quiet thing, Alice went on, half to herself as she swam slowly in the pool. And she sits purring so nicely by the fire, licking her paws and washing her face, and she is such a nice, soft thing to nurse. And she's such a good one for catching mice. Oh, I beg your pardon, cried Alice again, for this time the mouse was angry, and she felt sure it was truly offended. We won't talk about her any more if you'd rather not. We indeed, cried the mouse, who was trembling, as if I would talk on such a subject. Our family always hated cats. Nasty, low things. Don't let me hear the name again. I won't indeed, said Alice, in a great hurry to change the subject. Are you fond of dogs? The mouse did not answer, so Alice went on eagerly. There is such a nice little dog near our house I should like to show you. A little bright-eyed terrier, you know, with, oh, such long, curly brown hair. And it'll fetch things when you throw them, and it'll sit up and beg for its dinner, and all sorts of things. I can't remember half of them. And it belongs to a farmer, you know, and he says it's so useful, it's worth 100 pounds. He says it kills all the rats and— Oh dear, cried Alice in a sad voice, I'm afraid I offended it again. For the mouse was swimming away from her as fast as it could go, making splashes in the pool as it went. So she called softly, Mouse, dear, do come back again, and we won't talk about cats or dogs either if you don't like them. When the mouse heard this, it turned around and swam slowly back to her. Its face was pale, with anger, Alice thought. It said in a low, trembling voice, Let us get to the shore, and then I'll tell you my history, and you'll understand why it is I hate cats and dogs. It was time to go, for the pool was crowded with birds and animals that had fallen in. There were a duck, a dodo, a lory, an eaglet, and other strange creatures. Alice led the way, and the whole group swam to the shore. A strange group stood on the bank. The birds had wet feathers, the animals had wet fur. Everyone was wet, cross, and uncomfortable. First, they needed to get dry. They talked about this. Alice felt it was natural to talk to them. She argued with the lory, who became sulky and only said, I am older than you and must know better. Alice did not agree, wanting to know its age, but the lory would not tell, so they stopped. Then the mouse, who seemed important, called out, Sit down, all of you, and listen to me. I'll soon make you dry enough. They all sat down in a big circle. The mouse was in the middle. Alice watched it closely. She worried she would get sick if she did not get dry soon. Ahem, said the mouse, sounding important. Are you ready? This is the driest story I know. Please be quiet. William the Conqueror, helped by the Pope, was soon accepted by the English. The English needed leaders. They were used to new rulers and wars. Edwin and Morcar, 2 earls from Mercia and Northumbria. Ugh, said the lory with a shiver. I beg your pardon, said the mouse, frowning but polite. Did you speak? Not I, said the lory quickly. I thought you did, said the mouse. I will continue. Edwin and Morcar, the earls of Mercia and Northumbria, said they would support him. Even Stigand, the loyal Archbishop of Canterbury, found it good. Found what? Said the duck. Found it, the mouse replied, a little angrily. Of course you know what it means. I know what it means well enough when I find a thing, said the duck. It's usually a frog or a worm. The question is, what did the archbishop find? The mouse did not hear this question. It quickly went on. Found it good to go with Edgar Atheling to meet William and offer him the crown. William's behavior at first was fair, but his Normans were rude. How are you now, my dear? It asked, looking at Alice. As wet as ever, said Alice sadly. It doesn't dry me at all. In that case, said the dodo, standing up, I think we should stop this meeting. We need better ways to get dry. Speak English, said the eaglet. I don't know what half those long words mean, and I don't think you do either. The eaglet bent its head to hide a smile, and some other birds laughed softly. What I wanted to say, said the dodo, a little angry, was that the best way to get us dry would be a caucus-race. What is a caucus-race? Said Alice. Not that she wanted to know, but the dodo paused as if someone should speak, and no one else did. Well, said the dodo, the best way to explain it is to do it. First, it made a race course in a circle. The exact shape doesn't matter, it said. Then everyone stood along the course. There was no 1, 2, 3, and away. They ran when they liked and stopped when they liked, so it was hard to know when the race was over. But after running for about 30 minutes, they were dry. The dodo suddenly called, "The race is over." They all gathered, breathing hard, and asked, "But who has won?" The dodo thought hard about this question. It sat for a long time with a finger on its head. The others waited quietly. At last, the dodo said, "Everybody has won, and all must have prizes." "But who will give the prizes?" many voices asked together. "Why, she, of course," said the dodo, pointing to Alice. The whole group at once gathered around her, shouting confusedly, "Prizes! Prizes!" Alice did not know what to do. She put her hand in her pocket. She pulled out a box of candies. Luckily, the salt water was not inside. She gave them out as prizes. Everyone got exactly one candy. "But she must have a prize herself, you know," said the mouse. "Of course," the dodo replied very seriously. "What else have you got in your pocket?" he went on, turning to Alice. "Only a thimble," said Alice sadly. "Hand it over here," said the dodo. Then they all gathered around her once more. The dodo seriously presented the thimble, saying, "We ask your acceptance of this elegant thimble," and when it had finished this short speech, they all cheered. Alice thought it was very silly, but they all looked so serious that she did not laugh. She could not think of anything to say, so she just bowed and took the thimble. She tried to look serious. Next, they ate the candies. It was noisy. Big birds complained they couldn't taste theirs. Small ones choked and needed pats on the back. It was over soon. They sat down in a circle again. They asked the mouse to tell them another story. "You promised to tell me your history, you know," said Alice, "and why you hate C and D," she added quietly. She was afraid it would get angry again. "Mine is a long and a sad tale," said the mouse, turning to Alice and sighing. "It is a long tale, certainly," said Alice, looking down with wonder at the mouse's tail. "But why do you call it sad?" As the mouse spoke, Alice kept thinking about its tail, so her idea of the tale was like this. Fury said to a mouse that he met in the house, "Let us both go to law. I will prosecute you. Come, I'll take no denial. We must have a trial, for really this morning I've nothing to do." Said the mouse to the cur, "Such a trial, dear sir, with no jury or judge would be wasting our breath." "I'll be judge, I'll be jury," said cunning old Fury. "I'll try the whole cause and condemn you to death." "You are not listening," said the mouse to Alice angrily. "What are you thinking of?" "I beg your pardon," said Alice very humbly. "You had got to the fifth bend, I think." "I had not," cried the mouse, sharply and very angrily. "A knot," said Alice, always ready to help. She looked around carefully. "Oh, do let me help to undo it." "I shall do nothing of the sort," said the mouse, getting up and walking away. "You insult me by talking such nonsense." "I didn't mean it," pleaded poor Alice, "but you're so easily offended, you know." The mouse only growled in reply. "Please come back and finish your story," Alice called after it. The others all joined in. "Yes, please do." But the mouse only shook its head quickly and walked a little faster. "What a shame it didn't stay," sighed the Lory when the mouse was gone. An old crab told her daughter, "Ah, my dear, never get angry." "Be quiet, Mom," said the young crab a little rudely. "You make me so annoyed." "I wish I had our Dinah here, I know I do," Alice said aloud, speaking to no one in particular. "She'd soon bring it back." "And who is Dinah, if I may ask?" said the Lory. Alice replied eagerly, as she always liked to talk about her pet. "Dinah's our cat, and she's so good at catching mice you can't believe it. Oh, I wish you could see her after the birds. She'll eat a little bird as soon as she sees it." Alice's words surprised everyone. Some birds quickly left. An old magpie started wrapping itself up. It said, "I must go home. The night air is bad for my throat." A canary called to its children in a shaky voice, "Come, my dears, it's time for bed." They all found reasons to leave. Soon, Alice was alone. "I wish I didn't talk about Dinah," she said sadly to herself. "Nobody here likes her, but she's the best cat in the world. Oh, Dinah, will I ever see you again?" Alice started to cry again, feeling very lonely and sad. But soon she heard soft footsteps far away. She looked up quickly. She hoped the mouse had changed its mind and was coming back to finish its story. It was the white rabbit walking back slowly, looking worried like it lost something. Alice heard it speak to itself. "The Duchess! The Duchess! Oh, my dear paws! Oh, my fur and whiskers! She'll get me executed, as sure as ferrets are ferrets! Where can I have dropped them, I wonder?" Alice quickly guessed it was looking for the fan and the white gloves. She kindly looked for them, but they were nowhere. Everything seemed different. The big hall with the glass table and the small door was gone. Soon the rabbit saw Alice. It called to her angrily, "Why, Mary Ann, what are you doing out here? Run home this moment and fetch me a pair of gloves and a fan. Quick now." Alice was so scared that she ran right away in the direction it pointed. She did not try to explain the mistake. "He took me for his housemaid," she said to herself as she ran. "How surprised he'll be when he finds out who I am. But I'd better take him his fan and gloves, that is, if I can find them." As she said this, she came to a neat little house. On the door was a bright brass plate with the name W. Rabbit. She went inside without knocking. She hurried upstairs, scared of meeting the real Mary Ann and being sent out before finding the fan and gloves. "How queer it seems," Alice said to herself, "to be going messages for a rabbit. I suppose Dinah'll be sending me on messages next." And she began to imagine what would happen. "Miss Alice, come here directly and get ready for your walk." "Coming in a minute, nurse, but I've got to see that the mouse doesn't get out." "Only I don't think," Alice went on, "that they'd let Dinah stop in the house if it began ordering people about like that." Soon she found a neat little room with a table by the window. On it, just as she hoped, was a fan and some small white gloves. She took the fan and gloves, and as she was leaving, her eyes saw a small bottle near the mirror. No drink me label this time, but she opened it and put it to her lips. I know something interesting is sure to happen whenever I eat or drink anything, so I'll just see what this bottle does. I do hope it'll make me grow large again, for really I'm quite tired of being such a tiny little thing. It did happen, faster than she thought. She drank only a little and her head hit the ceiling. She had to bend to save her neck. She quickly put down the bottle, saying to herself, "That's quite enough. I hope I shan't grow any more. As it is, I can't get out at the door. I do wish I hadn't drunk quite so much." Oh no, it was too late to wish that. She went on growing. Soon she had to kneel. In another minute, there was no room. She tried lying down, one elbow against the door, her other arm around her head. Still, she grew. Finally, she put one arm out the window and one foot up the chimney. She said to herself, "Now I can do no more. Whatever happens, what will become of me?" Luckily, the magic bottle stopped working. She didn't grow more, but it was very uncomfortable and she couldn't get out of the room, so she felt sad. It was much pleasanter at home, thought poor Alice, when one wasn't always growing larger and smaller and being ordered about by mice and rabbits. I almost wish I hadn't gone down that rabbit hole. And yet, it's rather curious, you know, this sort of life. I do wonder what can have happened to me. When I used to read fairy tales, I fancied that kind of thing never happened, and now here I am in the middle of one. There ought to be a book written about me, that there ought, and when I grow up, I'll write one. But I'm grown up now, she added in a sorrowful tone. At least there's no room to grow up any more here. But then, thought Alice, shall I never get any older than I am now? That'll be a comfort one way, never to be an old woman. But then always to have lessons to learn. Oh, I shouldn't like that. "Oh, you foolish Alice," she answered herself. "How can you learn lessons in here? Why, there's hardly room for you, and no room at all for any lesson books." She went on talking to herself, but then she heard a voice outside and stopped to listen. "Mary Ann, Mary Ann," said the voice, "fetch me my gloves this moment." Then came a little sound of feet on the stairs. Alice knew it was the rabbit. He was coming to find her. She shook so much that the house shook. She forgot she was now much, much bigger than the rabbit. She didn't need to be scared. Soon the rabbit came to the door. He tried to open it, but the door opened in and Alice's elbow was against it. He could not open it. Alice heard it say to itself, "Then I'll go round and get in at the window." "That you won't," thought Alice. She waited until she heard the rabbit under the window. Then she suddenly put out her hand and grabbed the air. She didn't catch anything, but she heard a small shriek, a fall, and broken glass. She thought it might have fallen into a plant box. Next came an angry voice, the rabbit's. "Pat, Pat, where are you?" And then a voice she had never heard before. "Sure then, I'm here, digging for apples, Your Honor." "Digging for apples, indeed," said the rabbit angrily. "Here, come and help me out of this." Sounds of more broken glass. "Now tell me, Pat, what's that in the window?" "Sure, it's an arm, Your Honor." He pronounced it arm. "An arm, you goose. Who ever saw one that size? Why, it fills the whole window." "Sure it does, Your Honor, but it's an arm for all that." "Well, it's got no business there, at any rate. Go and take it away." It was quiet for a long time. Alice only heard whispers like, "Sure, I don't like it, Your Honor, at all, at all." "Do as I tell you, you coward." And at last she put out her hand again and grabbed the air. This time there were 2 small shrieks and more broken glass. "What a number of plant boxes there must be," thought Alice. I wonder what they'll do next. I only wish they could pull me out of the window. I'm sure I don't want to stay in here any longer." Finally, she heard small cartwheels and many voices talking together. She heard words like, "Where's the other ladder? Why, I hadn't to bring but one. Bill's got the other. Bill, fetch it here, lad. Here, put them up at this corner. No, tie them together first. They don't reach half high enough yet. Oh, they'll do well enough. Don't be particular. Here, Bill, catch hold of this rope. Will the roof bear? Mind that loose slate. Oh, it's coming down. Heads below." A loud crash. Now, who did that? It was Bill, I fancy. "Who's to go down the chimney?" "Nay, I shan't. You do it." "That I won't, then. Bill's to go down. Here, Bill, the master says you're to go down the chimney." "Oh, so Bill's got to come down the chimney, has he?" said Alice to herself. "Shy, they seem to put everything upon Bill. I wouldn't be in Bill's place for a good deal. This fireplace is narrow, to be sure, but I think I can kick a little." She put her foot down the chimney as far as she could. She waited, then heard a small animal, she didn't know what kind, scratching in the chimney above her. Then she said to herself, "This is Bill." She gave a strong kick. She waited to see what would happen. The first thing she heard was many voices together saying, "There goes Bill." Then the rabbit's voice, "Catch him, you by the hedge." Then silence. Then another mix of voices, "Hold up his head, brandy now, don't choke him. How was it, old fellow? What happened to you? Tell us all about it." Last came a small, weak, squeaking voice. "That's Bill," thought Alice. "Well, I hardly know. No more, thanky. I'm better now, but I'm a deal too flustered to tell you. All I know is something comes at me like a jack-in-the-box, and up I goes like a skyrocket." "So you did, old fellow," said the others. "We must burn the house down," said the rabbit's voice, and Alice called out as loud as she could, "If you do, I'll set Dinah at you." It was quiet at once. Alice thought, "I wonder what they will do next. If they had any sense, they'd take the roof off." After a minute or two, they started moving. Alice heard the rabbit say, "A barrowful will do to begin with." A barrowful of what? Alice thought. She didn't have to wonder long. Soon small stones hit the window. Some hit her face. Alice saw something strange. The stones on the floor turned into small cakes. A good idea came to her. If I eat one of these cakes, it's sure to make some change in my size, and as it can't possibly make me larger, it must make me smaller, I suppose. So she ate a cake and was happy to start shrinking right away. When she was small enough for the door, she ran out and saw many small animals and birds waiting outside. Poor Bill the lizard was in the middle, held up by 2 guinea pigs who were giving him something from a bottle. They all ran at Alice when she appeared, but she ran away as fast as she could. Soon she was safe in a thick wood. "The first thing I've got to do," said Alice to herself as she walked in the wood, "is to grow to my right size again, and the second thing is to find my way into that lovely garden. I think that will be the best plan." It sounded like a good plan, simple and neat, but she didn't know how to do it. As she looked among the trees, she heard a sharp bark above her head. She looked up quickly. A very big puppy looked down at her with big round eyes. It slowly stretched out one paw to touch her. "Poor little thing," Alice said kindly. She tried to whistle to it, but she was very scared. She thought it might be hungry and eat her, even if she was kind. She picked up a small stick and held it out. The puppy jumped up with a happy bark, running to play with the stick. Alice quickly hid behind a big thistle, scared of being run over. When she appeared, the puppy rushed at the stick again, falling over. Alice thought it was like playing with a cart horse and feared being trampled, so she ran around the thistle again. The puppy kept running at the stick, barking loudly. Finally, it sat down far away, panting, with its tongue out and eyes half closed. Alice saw a chance to escape. She ran right away until she was tired and out of breath, and the puppy's bark sounded very far away. "And yet, what a dear little puppy it was," said Alice, leaning against a yellow flower to rest and fanning herself with a leaf. "I should have liked teaching it tricks very much if I'd only been the right size to do it. Oh dear, I'd nearly forgotten that I've got to grow up again. Let me see, how is it to be managed? I suppose I ought to eat or drink something or other, but the great question is, what?" The big question was indeed what. Alice looked at the flowers and grass, but saw nothing right to eat or drink. A big mushroom grew near her, about her height. She looked under it, on both sides, and behind it. Then she thought maybe she should look on top. She stood on her toes and looked over the mushroom. Her eyes met those of a big blue caterpillar. It sat on top with its arms crossed, quietly smoking a long pipe, not noticing her at all. The caterpillar and Alice looked at each other. The caterpillar took its pipe out of its mouth and spoke in a sleepy voice. "Who are you?" said the caterpillar. Alice replied shyly, I don't really know, sir. Right now, at least, I know who I was this morning, but I think I have changed many times since then." "What do you mean?" said the caterpillar seriously. "Explain yourself." "I can't explain myself, I'm afraid, sir, because I'm not myself, you see." "I don't see," said the caterpillar. "I'm afraid I can't say it more clearly," Alice replied, "because I don't understand it myself. Being many different sizes in one day is very confusing." "It isn't," said the caterpillar. "Well, maybe you haven't felt it yet," said Alice, "but when you have to turn into a chrysalis, you will someday, you know, and then after that into a butterfly, I think you'll feel it a little strange, won't you?" "Not a bit," said the caterpillar. "Well, maybe your feelings are different," said Alice. "All I know is it would feel very strange to me." "You?" said the caterpillar with no respect. "Who are you?" Alice felt angry at the caterpillar's short answers. She stood up and said, "I think you ought to tell me who you are first." "Why?" said the caterpillar. Alice could not think of a good reason. The caterpillar seemed unhappy, so Alice turned away. "Come back," the caterpillar called after her. "I've something important to say." Alice turned and came back. "Keep your temper," said the caterpillar. "Is that all?" said Alice, trying not to be angry. "No," said the caterpillar. Alice decided to wait. For some minutes it smoked quietly. Then it put down its arms, took the pipe out of its mouth again, and said, "So you think you're changed, do you?" "I'm afraid I am, sir," said Alice. "I can't remember things like I used to, and I don't stay the same size for 10 minutes. "Can't remember what things?" said the caterpillar. "Well, I've tried to say, 'How doth the little busy bee,' but it all came different," Alice replied sadly. "Repeat, 'You are old, Father William,'" said the caterpillar. Alice folded her hands and began. "You are old, Father William," the young man said, "and your hair has become very white, and yet you incessantly stand on your head. Do you think at your age it is right?" "In my youth," Father William replied to his son, "I feared it might injure the brain, but now that I'm perfectly sure I have none, why, I do it again and again." "You are old," said the youth, "as I mentioned before, and have grown most uncommonly fat, yet you turned a back somersault in at the door. Pray, what is the reason of that?" "In my youth," said the sage, as he shook his gray locks, "I kept all my limbs very supple by the use of this ointment, 1 shilling the box. Allow me to sell you a couple." "You are old," said the youth, "and your jaws are too weak for anything tougher than suet. Yet you finished the goose with the bones and the beak. Pray, how did you manage to do it?" "In my youth," said his father, "I took to the law and argued each case with my wife, and the muscular strength which it gave to my jaw has lasted the rest of my life." "You are old," said the youth. "One would hardly suppose that your eye was as steady as ever, yet you balanced an eel on the end of your nose. What made you so awfully clever?" "I have answered 3 questions, and that is enough," said his father. "Don't give yourself airs. Do you think I can listen all day to such stuff? Be off, or I'll kick you downstairs." "That is not said right," said the caterpillar. "Not quite right, I'm afraid," Alice said a little shyly. "Some of the words have changed." "It is wrong from beginning to end," said the caterpillar strongly, and there was silence for some minutes. The caterpillar spoke first. "What size do you want to be?" it asked. "Oh, I don't care much about the size," Alice quickly replied. "Only I don't like changing so often, you know." "I don't know," said the caterpillar. Alice said nothing. She felt herself getting angry. "Are you content now?" said the caterpillar. "Well, I should like to be a little larger, sir, if you wouldn't mind," said Alice. 3 inches is such a bad height to be." "It is a very good height indeed," said the caterpillar angrily, standing up straight as it spoke. It was exactly 3 inches high. "But I'm not used to it," pleaded Alice sadly. She thought, "I wish the animals wouldn't get angry so easily." "You'll get used to it in time," said the caterpillar, and it put the pipe into its mouth and began smoking again. Alice waited. The caterpillar took the pipe out of its mouth. It yawned, shook itself, and then crawled off the mushroom into the grass. As it left, it said, "One side will make you grow taller, and the other side will make you grow shorter." "One side of what? The other side of what?" Alice thought. "Of the mushroom," said the caterpillar, just as if she had asked it out loud, and in another moment it was gone. Alice looked at the mushroom, thinking. She tried to find its 2 sides, but it was round. This was hard. At last she put her arms around it. She broke off a piece with each hand. "And now which is which?" she said to herself. She ate a little of the right-hand piece to see what would happen. The next moment she felt a strong hit under her chin. It had hit her foot. She was scared by this sudden change. She knew she had to act fast, as she was getting smaller. She started to eat some of the other piece. Her chin was pressed against her foot. There was almost no room to open her mouth, but she did it at last and swallowed a small piece. "Whew! My head is free at last," Alice said, happily. Then she was scared. She looked down and could not find her shoulders. All she saw was a very long neck growing from green leaves far below her. "What can all that green stuff be?" said Alice. "And where have my shoulders gone? And oh, my poor hands, why can't I see you?" She waved her hands, but nothing happened. The green leaves far away moved a little. She could not get her hands to her head, so she tried to get her head down to her hands. Her neck could bend easily like a snake. She made her neck bend down. She was about to go into the leaves, which were treetops. Then she heard a loud hiss and pulled back. A large pigeon had flown into her face. It was hitting her with its wings. "Serpent!" screamed the pigeon. "I'm not a serpent," Alice said angrily. "Leave me alone." "Serpent, I say again," repeated the pigeon, but in a quieter voice. It added sadly, "I've tried every way, and nothing seems to suit them." "I haven't the least idea what you're talking about," Alice said. "I've tried the roots of trees, and I've tried banks, and I've tried hedges," the pigeon went on, not listening to her. "But those serpents, they are never happy." Alice was confused. She waited until the pigeon finished speaking. "As if it wasn't trouble enough hatching the eggs," said the pigeon, "but I must be on the lookout for serpents night and day. Why, I haven't had any sleep these 3 weeks." "I'm very sorry you've been bothered," said Alice, who started to understand. "And just as I'd taken the highest tree in the wood," shouted the pigeon loudly, "and just as I was thinking I should be free of them at last, they must needs come wriggling down from the sky. Ugh, serpent!" "But I'm not a serpent, I tell you. I'm a... "Well, what are you?" said the pigeon. "I can see you're trying to invent something." I'm a little girl," said Alice, not sure as she remembered how many times she had changed that day. "A not true story indeed," said the pigeon in a rude voice. "I've seen a good many little girls in my time, but never one with such a neck as that. No, no, you're a serpent, and there's no use denying it. I suppose you'll be telling me next that you never tasted an egg." "I have tasted eggs, certainly," said Alice, who told the truth. "But little girls eat eggs quite as much as serpents do, you know." "I don't believe it," said the pigeon. "But if they do, why then they're a kind of serpent. That's all I can say." This was such a new idea to Alice that she was silent for a minute or two. This gave the pigeon the chance to add, "You're looking for eggs, I know that well enough. And what does it matter to me whether you're a little girl or a serpent?" "It matters a good deal to me," said Alice quickly, "but I'm not looking for eggs, actually, and if I was, I would not want yours. I don't like them raw." "Well, be off then," said the pigeon in an unhappy voice as it went back to its nest. Alice bent down among the trees. Her neck kept getting caught in the branches. She stopped often to free it. She remembered she still held the mushroom pieces. She started to eat carefully, first from one, then the other. She grew taller and shorter. At last, she was her normal size. She had not been her normal size for a long time. It felt strange, but she got used to it. She talked to herself. "Half my plan is done now. These changes are confusing. I don't know what I will be. But I'm back to my normal size. Next, I need to get into that beautiful garden. How is that to be done, I wonder?" As she spoke, she saw an open area with a small house, about 4 feet tall. "If I go there this big," Alice thought, "I will scare everyone." So she ate a little of the right-hand mushroom piece again. She did not go near the house until she was 9 inches tall. Alice stood looking at the house. She wondered what to do. Suddenly, a footman ran out of the wood. He wore a special uniform. Alice thought he looked like a fish. He knocked loudly on the door. Another footman opened it. This one had a round face and big eyes like a frog. Both footmen had white curly hair. Alice was very curious. She moved closer to listen. The fish footman took a big letter from under his arm. It was almost as big as him. He gave it to the other footman. He said in a serious voice, "For the Duchess, an invitation from the Queen to play croquet." The frog footman repeated, also in a serious voice, "From the Queen, an invitation for the Duchess to play croquet." Then they both bowed low. Their curly hair got stuck together. Alice laughed a lot. She ran back into the wood so they would not hear her. When she looked out again, the fish footman was gone. The other footman sat on the ground by the door. He looked up at the sky. Alice walked slowly to the door and knocked. "There's no use knocking," said the footman, "and for 2 reasons. First, I'm on the same side of the door as you. Second, they are making so much noise inside, no one can hear you." Alice could hear a very strange noise. There was howling and sneezing, and sometimes a loud crash, like a plate breaking. "Please, then," said Alice, "how can I get in?" "Maybe knocking would make sense," the footman continued, not looking at her. "If the door was between us, for example, if you were inside, you could knock and I could let you out." He looked at the sky the whole time. Alice thought this was rude. But maybe he can't help it, she thought. His eyes are so high on his head. But he could answer questions. "How can I get in?" she asked again, loudly. "I will sit here," said the footman, "until tomorrow." Just then, the door opened. A large plate flew out. It went straight at the footman's head. It just touched his nose and broke on a tree behind him. "Or maybe the next day," the footman went on, as if nothing had happened. "How can I get in?" Alice asked again, louder. "Are you supposed to get in?" said the footman. "That's the first question." Alice did not like this. "It's really bad," she said to herself. "All the creatures argue. It's enough to make you crazy." The footman seemed to like repeating what he said. "I will sit here," he said, "sometimes for many days." "But what should I do?" said Alice. "Anything you like," the footman said, and he started to whistle. "Oh, it's no use talking to him," Alice said sadly. "He is completely silly." She opened the door and went in. The door opened into a big kitchen. It was full of smoke. The Duchess sat on a stool in the middle holding a baby. The cook stood over the fire stirring a big pot of soup. "There is too much pepper in that soup," Alice said to herself, sneezing. There was too much pepper in the air. The Duchess sneezed sometimes. The baby sneezed and cried without stopping. Only the cook and a big cat did not sneeze. The cat sat by the fire and smiled from ear to ear. "Please tell me," said Alice, a little shyly, "why your cat smiles like that." "It's a Cheshire Cat, and that's why." "Pig." The Duchess said "pig" very loudly. Alice jumped, but she saw the Duchess was talking to the baby, not to her, so Alice felt brave and spoke again. "I did not know that Cheshire Cats always smiled. I did not know that cats could smile." "They all can," said the Duchess, "and most of them do." "I don't know any that do," Alice said politely. She was happy to talk. "You don't know much," said the Duchess. "That is true." Alice did not like what the Duchess said. She wanted to talk about something else. The cook took the pot off the fire. She started throwing everything she could find at the Duchess and the baby. First, metal tools from the fire, then pots, plates, and dishes. The Duchess did not care. The baby cried so much already. "Oh, please be careful," cried Alice. She was very scared. "Oh, his special nose!" A very big pot flew past the baby's nose and almost hit it. "If everyone thought about their own things," the Duchess said in a rough voice, "the world would move much faster." "That would not be good," Alice said. She was happy to show what she knew. "Think about day and night. The earth takes 24 hours to turn around." "Speaking of turning," the Duchess said, "cut off her head." Alice looked at the cook. She wondered if the cook would do it, but the cook was busy stirring the soup and did not seem to listen, so Alice went on. 24 hours, I think. Or is it 12? Oh, don't bother me," said the Duchess. "I hate numbers." She began to hold her baby again. She sang a song to it. She shook the baby hard at the end of every line. "Speak roughly to your little boy and beat him when he sneezes. He only does it to annoy because he knows it teases." Chorus. The cook and the baby sang too. "Wow, wow, wow." The Duchess sang the second part of the song. She threw the baby up and down very hard. The poor baby cried so much that Alice could hardly hear the words. "I speak severely to my boy, I beat him when he sneezes, for he can thoroughly enjoy the pepper when he pleases." Chorus. Wow, wow, wow. "Here, you can hold it for a bit if you like," the Duchess said to Alice. She threw the baby at her. "I must go and get ready to play croquet with the Queen." The Duchess hurried out. The cook threw a frying pan after her, but it missed. Alice caught the baby. It was hard because the baby had a strange shape. Its arms and legs went in all directions, like a starfish, Alice thought. The baby made loud noises like a train. It kept bending itself up and then straight again. For the first few minutes, Alice could barely hold it. Alice found a way to hold it. She twisted it into a kind of knot and held its right ear and left foot. Then she carried it outside. "If I don't take this baby with me," Alice thought, "they will kill it soon. It would be wrong to leave it here." She said this out loud. The baby made a grunting sound. It had stopped sneezing now. "Don't grunt. That is not a good way to talk." The baby grunted again. Alice looked closely at its face. It had a very short, turned-up nose, like a pig's snout. Its eyes were also getting very small for a baby. Alice did not like how it looked, but maybe it was just crying, she thought. She looked for tears. No, there were no tears. "If you are going to turn into a pig, my dear," Alice said seriously, "I will not help you any more. Be careful." The poor little thing cried again, or grunted, she could not tell. They walked in silence for a while. Alice started to think, "What will I do with this creature when I get home?" Then it grunted again, very loudly. Alice looked at its face, worried. This time she saw it clearly. It was a pig. She knew it was silly to carry it any more, so she put the little pig down. She felt happy to see it walk quietly into the wood. If it had grown up, she said to herself, it would have been a very ugly child, but it is a handsome pig, I think. She began to think about other children she knew who might make good pigs. She was just saying to herself, if only one knew how to change them, when she saw the Cheshire Cat. It was sitting on a tree branch nearby. The cat only smiled when it saw Alice. It looked friendly, she thought, but it had very long claws and many teeth, so Alice felt she should be polite. "Cheshire Puss," she began, a little shyly. She did not know if the cat would like the name, but it only smiled a little wider. Good, it's happy so far, Alice thought. She went on, "Please, can you tell me which way I should go from here?" "That depends a lot on where you want to go," said the cat. I don't care much where, said Alice. Then it does not matter which way you go, said the cat. As long as I get somewhere, Alice added to explain. Oh, you will surely do that, said the cat, if you just walk long enough. Alice knew this was true, so she tried another question. What kind of people live around here? In that direction, the cat said, moving its right paw, lives a hatter, and in that direction, moving its other paw, lives a March hare. Visit anyone you like. They are both crazy. But I don't want to go among crazy people, Alice said. Oh, you cannot help that, the cat said. We are all crazy here. I am crazy. You are crazy. How do you know I'm crazy? Said Alice. You must be, the cat said, or you would not have come here. Alice did not think that proved it, but she went on. And how do you know that you are crazy? First, the cat said, a dog is not crazy. You agree? I suppose so, said Alice. Well then, the cat went on, a dog growls when it is angry, it wags its tail when it is happy. Now I growl when I am happy, and I wag my tail when I am angry, so I am crazy. I call it purring, not growling, said Alice. Call it what you like. Do you play croquet with the queen today? I would like that very much, said Alice, but I have not been invited yet. You will see me there, the cat said, and it disappeared. Alice was not very surprised. She was used to strange things now. She looked at the empty space. Then the cat suddenly appeared again. By the way, what happened to the baby? Said the cat. I almost forgot to ask. It turned into a pig, Alice said softly, as if it was normal. I thought it would, said the cat, and disappeared again. Alice waited, thinking the cat might come back, but it did not. After a minute or two, she walked towards where the March hare lived. I have seen hatters before, she said to herself. The March hare will be more interesting, and maybe since it is May, he will not be so very crazy, not as crazy as in March. As she said this, she looked up. The cat was there again, sitting on a tree branch. Did you say pig or fig? Said the cat. I said pig, Alice answered, and I wish you would not keep appearing and disappearing so suddenly. You make me feel dizzy. All right, said the cat. This time it disappeared slowly. It started with its tail and ended with its smile. The smile stayed for some time after the rest of the cat was gone. Well, I have often seen a cat without a smile, Alice thought, but a smile without a cat? It is the strangest thing I have ever seen. She walked a little farther and saw the March hare's house. She knew it was the right house because the chimneys looked like ears. The roof was made of fur. It was a very big house. Alice did not want to go closer. She ate more of the mushroom and became about 2 feet tall. Even then she walked towards it a little shyly. She said to herself, "What if it is very crazy after all? I almost wished I had gone to see the Hatter instead." Under a tree, the March Hare and Hatter had tea. A dormouse sat between them, asleep. The others used it as a cushion, talking over its head. Very uncomfortable for the dormouse, thought Alice, but as it's asleep, I suppose it doesn't mind. The table was big, but they sat close together. "No room, no room," they cried when they saw Alice coming. "There's plenty of room," said Alice, a little angry. She sat in a big chair at one end of the table. "Have some wine," said the March Hare. Alice looked around. Only tea was on the table. "I don't see any wine," she said. "There isn't any," said the March Hare. "Then it wasn't very kind of you to offer it," said Alice angrily. "It wasn't very kind of you to sit down without being invited," said the March Hare. "I didn't know it was your table," said Alice. "It's set for many more than 3. "Your hair wants cutting," said the Hatter. He looked at Alice with curiosity. It was his first speech. "You should learn not to say things like that," said Alice. "It's very rude." The Hatter opened his eyes wide, but all he said was, "Why is a raven like a writing desk?" "Now we will have some fun," thought Alice. "I'm glad they started asking riddles. I think I can guess that," she said aloud. "Do you mean that you think you can find out the answer to it?" said the March Hare. "Exactly so," said Alice. "Then you should say what you mean," the March Hare went on. "I do. At least, I mean what I say. That's the same thing, you know." "Not the same thing a bit," said the Hatter. "You might just as well say that I see what I eat is the same thing as I eat what I see." "You might just as well say," added the March Hare, who seemed to be talking in his sleep, "that I breathe when I sleep is the same thing as I sleep when I breathe." "It is the same thing with you," said the Hatter. The talk stopped. Everyone was quiet. Alice thought about ravens and writing desks, but knew little. The Hatter spoke first. "What day is it?" he said, turning to Alice. He took his watch, shaking it often. Alice thought a little, then said, "The 4th. "2 days wrong," the Hatter sighed. "I told you butter wouldn't work in it," he added, looking angry at the March Hare. "It was the best butter, you know," the March Hare replied softly. "Yes, but crumbs got in," the Hatter grumbled. "You shouldn't have put it in with the bread knife." The March Hare took the watch, looked sadly, then dipped it in his tea. He looked again, but said, "It was the best butter, you know." Alice looked over his shoulder. "What a funny watch," she said. "It tells the day, but not the time." "Why should it?" the Hatter mumbled. "Does your watch tell you the year?" "Of course not," Alice replied quickly, "but that's because the year stays the same for a long time, which is just the case with mine," said the Hatter. Alice was puzzled. The Hatter's words had no meaning. "I don't quite understand you," she said as politely as she could. "The Dormouse is asleep again," said the Hatter. He poured a little hot tea on its nose. The Dormouse shook its head, annoyed. Without opening its eyes, it said, of course, just what I was going to say myself." "Have you guessed the riddle yet?" the Hatter said, turning to Alice. "No, I give it up," Alice replied. "What's the answer?" "I haven't the slightest idea," said the Hatter. "Nor I," said the March Hare. Alice sighed tiredly. "I think you could do something better with your time," she said, "than ask riddles that have no answers." "If you knew time as well as I do," said the Hatter, "you wouldn't talk about wasting it. It's him." "I don't know what you mean," said Alice. "Of course you don't," the Hatter said. "I bet you never even spoke to time." "Perhaps not," Alice replied, "but I know I have to beat time when I learn music." "Ah, that's why," said the Hatter. "He won't let you beat him. If you were friends with him, he'd do almost anything you liked with the clock. For example, imagine it was 9 o'clock in the morning, time for lessons. You'd just whisper a hint to time, and the clock would quickly move. 1:30, time for dinner." "I only wish it was," the March Hare whispered. "That would be great," said Alice, "but then I wouldn't be hungry, you know." "Not at first, perhaps, but you could keep it to 1:30 as long as you liked." "Is that the way you manage?" Alice asked. The Hatter shook his head sadly. "Not I," he replied. "We argued last March, just before he went mad, you know." He pointed his teaspoon at the March Hare. "It was at the big concert for the Queen of Hearts, and I had to sing 'Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Bat, How I Wonder What You're At.' You know the song, perhaps." "I've heard something like it," Alice said. "It goes on, you know," the Hatter continued, "in this way. Up above the world you fly, like a tea tray in the sky. Twinkle, twinkle." The Dormouse shook itself and began singing. They pinched it to stop. "Well, I had just finished the first part," said the Hatter, "when the Queen jumped up and shouted, 'He's killing the time! Cut off his head!'" "How very mean!" exclaimed Alice. "And since that time," the Hatter went on, "he won't do anything I ask. It's always 6 o'clock now." Alice had an idea. "Is that why so many tea things are here?" she asked. "Yes, that's it," said the Hatter with a sigh. "It's always tea time, and we have no time to wash the things." "Then you keep moving, I suppose?" Alice asked. "Exactly so," said the Hatter, "as the things get used up." "But what happens when you come to the start again?" Alice asked carefully. "Let's change the topic," said the March Hare, yawning. "I'm tired of this. I think the young lady should tell us a story." "I'm afraid I don't know one," Alice said, worried by the idea. "Then the Dormouse shall," they both cried. "Wake up, Dormouse," and they pinched it on both sides at once. The Dormouse slowly opened his eyes. "I wasn't asleep," he said in a rough, weak voice. "I heard every word you were saying." "Tell us a story," said the March Hare. "Yes, please do," pleaded Alice. "And be quick about it," added the Hatter, "or you'll be asleep again before it's done." Once upon a time there were 3 little sisters. Their names were Elsie, Lacey, and Tilly. They lived at the bottom of a well. "What did they eat?" Alice asked. She always cared a lot about food and drink. "They lived on treacle," the Dormouse said after thinking a minute or two. "They couldn't have done that, you know," Alice said. "They'd have been sick." "So they were," said the Dormouse, "very sick." Alice tried to imagine this strange life, but it puzzled her. She asked, "But why did they live at the bottom of a well?" "Have some more tea," the March Hare said to Alice. "I've had nothing yet," Alice replied, "so I can't take more." "You mean you can't take less," said the Hatter. "It's very easy to take more than nothing." "Nobody asked your opinion," Alice said. "Who is saying rude things now?" the Hatter asked. Alice did not know what to say. She took some tea and bread and butter. Then she turned to the Dormouse and asked her question again. Why did they live at the bottom of a well? The Dormouse again took a minute or two to think about it and then said, "It was a treacle well." "There's no such thing," Alice began angrily, but the Hatter and the March Hare went, "Shh, shh." The Dormouse said, annoyed, "If you can't be kind, you'd better finish the story yourself." "No, please go on," Alice said. "I won't stop you again. I suppose there may be one." "One indeed," said the Dormouse, but he agreed to go on. "And so these 3 little sisters, they were learning to draw, you know." "What did they draw?" Alice asked. She forgot her promise. "Treacle," said the Dormouse, without thinking this time. "I want a clean cup," interrupted the Hatter. "Let's all move one place on." He moved as he spoke. The Dormouse followed. The March Hare moved, and Alice unwillingly took his place. The Hatter gained. Alice was worse off as the March Hare had just poured the milk jug into his plate. Alice did not want to make the Dormouse angry again, so she began very carefully. But I don't understand. Where did they draw the treacle from? You can draw water out of a water well, said the Hatter, so I should think you could draw a treacle out of a treacle well, eh, stupid? But they were in the well, Alice said to the Dormouse, ignoring the Hatter. Of course they were, said the Dormouse, well in. This answer confused Alice so much she let the Dormouse talk for some time without stopping it. They were learning to draw, the Dormouse went on. It yawned and rubbed its eyes because it was very sleepy, and they drew all kinds of things, everything that begins with an M. Why with an M? Alice asked. Why not? Said the March Hare. Alice was silent. The Dormouse closed its eyes, falling asleep. The Hatter pinched it. It woke with a cry and went on. That begins with an M, such as mousetraps and the moon and memory and muchness. You know, you say things are much of a muchness. Did you ever see such a thing as a drawing of a muchness? Really, now you ask me, I don't think. Then you shouldn't talk, said the Hatter. This rudeness was too much for Alice. She got up and walked away. Dormouse fell asleep. Others did not notice her leave. She looked back, hoping for a call. Last, she saw them trying to put Dormouse into the teapot. I will never go there again, Alice said, walking through the wood. It's the most foolish tea party I have ever been to. She saw a tree with a door. That's very strange, she thought. Everything is strange today. I should go in. She entered. In the hall, near the glass table, now I'll do better, she thought. She took the golden key and unlocked the door to the garden. She ate mushroom, kept in her pocket, until she was a foot high. She walked down the passage, and then she was in the beautiful garden with bright flowers and cool fountains. Near the garden door, a white rose tree stood. 3 gardeners were painting its roses red. Alice thought this was strange and went closer to watch. Just as she came near, she heard one gardener say, "Watch out, 5. Don't splash paint on me like that." "I couldn't help it," said 5, sounding a bit angry. "7 hit my arm." Then 7 looked up and said, "That's right, 5. Always blame others." "You should not talk," said 5. "I heard the Queen say yesterday you should lose your head." "Why?" asked the gardener who spoke first. "That's not your business, too," said 7. "Yes, it is his business," said 5, "and I will tell him it was for bringing the cook tulip roots instead of onions." 7 threw down his brush. He started to say, "Well, of all the unfair things," but then he saw Alice watching them. He stopped quickly. The others also looked around. All of them bowed low. "Can you tell me," Alice said a little shyly, "why you are painting those roses?" 5 and 7 said nothing. They looked at 2. 2 began in a low voice. "Well, miss, this tree should have been a red rose tree. We put a white one in by mistake. If the Queen finds out, we will all lose our heads, you know. So, miss, we are trying our best before she comes to—" At that moment, 5, who had been looking across the garden, shouted, "The Queen! The Queen!" The 3 gardeners quickly lay flat on their faces. Alice heard many footsteps. She looked around, wanting to see the Queen. First came 10 soldiers carrying clubs. Next came 10 courtiers with diamonds on them. They walked 2 by 2. After them came the 10 royal children. They jumped happily, holding hands, and all had hearts on them. Next came the guests, mostly kings and queens. Alice saw the White Rabbit. He was talking quickly and nervously. He walked past without seeing her. Then came the Knave of Hearts, carrying the king's crown. Last came the King and Queen of Hearts. Alice was not sure if she should lie down like the gardeners, but she thought, what good is a parade if people lie down and can't see it? So she stood still. When the parade came to Alice, everyone stopped and looked at her. The Queen said strictly, "Who is this?" She said it to the Knave. He only bowed and smiled. "Idiot," said the Queen. She shook her head. Then turning to Alice, she went on, "What's your name, child?" "My name is Alice, please, Your Majesty," Alice said very politely, but she added to herself, "They are only a pack of cards after all. I don't need to be afraid of them." "And who are these?" said the Queen. She pointed to the 3 gardeners lying around the rose tree. Because they were lying on their faces, the Queen could not tell if they were gardeners, soldiers, courtiers, or her own children. "How should I know?" Alice said. She was surprised at her own bravery. "It's not my business." The Queen turned red with anger. She stared at Alice like a wild animal for a moment. Then she screamed, "Off with her head! Off!" "Nonsense!" said Alice very loudly and clearly. The Queen became quiet. The King put his hand on her arm. He said shyly, "Think, my dear, she is only a child." The Queen turned angrily away from him. She said to the Knave, "Turn them over." The Knave did so very carefully with one foot. "Get up," said the Queen in a sharp, loud voice. The 3 gardeners instantly jumped up. They began bowing to the King, the Queen, the royal children, and everyone else. "Stop that!" screamed the Queen. "You make me dizzy." Then, turning to the rose tree, she went on, "What have you been doing here?" "May it please your Majesty," said Tu in a very humble voice. He went down on one knee as he spoke. "We were trying—" "I see," said the Queen. She had been looking at the roses. "Off with their heads." The parade moved on. 3 soldiers stayed behind to kill the poor gardeners. The gardeners ran to Alice for help. "You won't lose your heads," said Alice. She put them into a big flower pot nearby. The 3 soldiers looked for them. Then they marched off. "Are their heads off?" shouted the Queen. "Their heads are gone, if it pleases your Majesty," the soldiers shouted back. "That's right," shouted the Queen. "Can you play croquet?" The soldiers were silent. They looked at Alice as the question was for her. "Yes," shouted Alice. "Come on, then," roared the Queen. Alice joined the parade. She wondered very much what would happen next. It's a very nice day," said a shy voice next to her. She was walking by the White Rabbit. He was looking closely at her face. "Very," said Alice. "Where is the Duchess?" "Hush, hush," said the rabbit in a low, fast voice. He put his mouth close to her ear and whispered, "She is going to be executed." "Why?" said Alice. "Did you say, 'What a pity'?" the rabbit asked. "No, I didn't. I don't think it's a pity at all. I said, 'What for?'" "She hit the Queen's ears," began the rabbit. Alice laughed a little. "Oh, hush," the rabbit whispered in a scared voice. "The Queen will hear you." You see, she came quite late, and the Queen said, "Get to your places," shouted the Queen in a very loud voice. People started running everywhere. They bumped into each other, but they settled down in a minute or two. The game began. Alice thought she had never seen such a strange croquet ground. The balls were live hedgehogs. The mallets were live flamingos. The soldiers had to bend over to make the arches. The main problem Alice had was controlling her flamingo. She held its body under her arm, but often when she aimed to hit the hedgehog, the flamingo would twist its neck and look at her. It looked so confused she had to laugh. Then, when she got its head down, the hedgehog would unroll itself and crawl away. Also, the ground was uneven, and the soldiers who made the arches often moved. Alice soon decided it was a very difficult game. All the players played at once without waiting. They argued and fought for the hedgehogs. Soon the queen became very angry. She stamped about, shouting, "Off with his head," or "Off with her head," often. Alice began to feel very worried. She had not argued with the queen yet, but she knew it could happen any minute. And then she thought, what would happen to me? They love to cut off people's heads here. It's a wonder anyone is still alive. She looked for a way to escape without being seen. Then she saw a strange thing in the air. It puzzled her at first, but after watching it for a minute or two, she saw it was a grin. She said to herself, "It's the Cheshire Cat. Now I will have someone to talk to." "How are you doing?" said the cat as soon as its mouth appeared. Alice waited for the eyes. She thought, no use talking until its ears come. Soon the whole head appeared. Alice put down her flamingo. She began to tell about the game, glad to have someone listen. The cat did not show any more of itself. "I don't think they play fairly," Alice began. "They argue so much you can't hear yourself. There are no rules or no one follows them, and it's confusing with all the things alive. For example, the arch I need to go through is walking away, and I should have hit the queen's hedgehog, but it ran away when it saw mine coming." "How do you like the queen?" said the cat in a low voice. "Not at all," Alice said. "She's so very—" Just then she saw that the queen was close behind her, listening, so she went on, "Likely to win, that it's hardly worth finishing the game." The queen smiled and walked on. "Who are you talking to?" said the king. He walked up to Alice and looked at the cat's head with great interest. "It's a friend of mine, a Cheshire Cat. Let me introduce it." "I don't like how it looks at all," said the king. "However, it may kiss my hand if it wants." "I'd rather not," the cat said. "Don't be rude," said the king, "and don't look at me like that." He moved behind Alice. "A cat may look at a king," Alice said. "I've read that in some book, but I don't remember where." "Well, it must be taken away," said the king very strongly. He called the queen, who was passing at that moment. "My dear, I wish you would have this cat removed." The queen had only one way to solve all problems, big or small. "Off with his head," she said, without even looking around. "I'll get the executioner myself," said the king eagerly. He hurried off. Alice thought she might as well go back and see how the game was going. She heard the queen's voice in the distance, screaming angrily. She had already heard her order 3 players to be killed for missing their turns. She did not like how things looked at all. The game was so messy that she never knew if it was her turn or not, so she went to find her hedgehog. The hedgehog was fighting another hedgehog. Alice thought this was a good chance to hit them, but her flamingo was on the other side of the garden trying to fly into a tree. When she caught the flamingo, the fight was over. The hedgehogs were gone. "It doesn't matter," thought Alice, "as the arches are gone." She put the flamingo under her arm so it would not escape and went back to talk to her friend. When she got back to the Cheshire Cat, a crowd was around it. The executioner, king, and queen were arguing, all talking at once. Everyone else was quiet and looked uncomfortable. When Alice appeared, all 3 asked her to solve the problem. They repeated their arguments, but all spoke at once. She found it hard to understand them. The executioner said you could not cut off a head without a body. He had never done it before and would not start now. The king said anything with a head could lose its head. He told them not to talk nonsense. The queen said if something was not done quickly, she would kill everyone. This made everyone look serious and worried. Alice could think of nothing else to say but, "It belongs to the Duchess. You should ask her about it." "She's in prison," the queen said to the executioner. "Bring her here." And the executioner left very fast. The cat's head began to disappear when he left. By the time he came back with the Duchess, it was gone. The king and executioner ran looking for it. The rest went back to the game. "You can't think how glad I am to see you again, you dear old thing," said the Duchess. She put her arm into Alice's and they walked together. Alice was happy the Duchess was in a good mood. She thought maybe it was only the pepper that had made her so angry in the kitchen. "When I'm a Duchess," Alice said to herself, "I won't have any pepper in my kitchen at all. Soup is good without it. Maybe pepper always makes people angry and vinegar makes them sour, and sweet things make children sweet-tempered." She had forgotten the Duchess. She was a little surprised when she heard her voice close to her ear. "You're thinking about something, my dear, and that makes you forget to talk. I can't tell you the moral of that now, but I will remember it soon." "Perhaps it hasn't one," Alice said. "Tut, tut, child," said the Duchess. "Everything's got a moral, if only you can find it." She moved closer to Alice. Alice didn't like her being so close. The Duchess was very ugly, and her sharp chin rested uncomfortably on Alice's shoulder. But Alice did not want to be rude, so she stayed still. "The game's going on rather better now," Alice said, to keep talking. "'Tis so," said the Duchess, "and the moral of that is, oh, 'tis love that makes the world go round." "Somebody said," Alice whispered, "that it's done by everybody minding their own business." "Oh, well, it means much the same thing," said the Duchess. She dug her sharp little chin into Alice's shoulder. She added, "And the moral of that is, take care of the sense, and the sounds will take care of themselves." "I dare say you're wondering why I don't put my arm round your waist," the Duchess said after a moment. "The reason is, I'm not sure about your flamingo's temper. Shall I try it?" "He might bite," Alice said carefully. She did not want to try the experiment. "Very true," said the Duchess. "Flamingos and mustard both bite. And the moral of that is, birds of a feather flock together." "Only mustard isn't a bird," Alice said. "Right, as usual," said the Duchess. "What a clear way you have of putting things." "It's a mineral, I think," Alice said. "Of course it is," said the Duchess. She seemed to agree with everything Alice said. "There's a large mustard mine near here, and the moral of that is, the more there is of mine, the less there is of yours." "Oh, I know," exclaimed Alice. She had not listened to the last remark. "It's a vegetable. It doesn't look like one, but it is." "I quite agree with you," said the Duchess, "and the moral of that is, be what you would seem to be." "I think I should understand that better," Alice said very politely, "if I had it written down, but I can't quite follow it as you say it." "That's nothing to what I could say if I chose," the Duchess replied in a happy voice. "Pray don't trouble yourself to say it any longer than that," said Alice. "Oh, don't talk about trouble," said the Duchess. "I make you a present of everything I've said as yet." "Thinking again?" the Duchess asked. She poked Alice with her sharp little chin again. I've a right to think, Alice said sharply. She was starting to feel worried. Just about as much right as pigs have to fly, and But then the Duchess's voice stopped. Her arm began to shake. Alice looked up. The Queen stood in front of them, looking very angry. "A fine day, Your Majesty," the Duchess began in a low, weak voice. "Now, I give you fair warning," shouted the Queen. She stamped on the ground. "Either you or your head must be off, and that in about half no time. Take your choice." The Duchess chose quickly. She was gone in a moment. "Let's go on with the game," the Queen said to Alice. Alice was too scared to speak. She slowly followed the Queen back to the Croquet-Ground. The other guests quickly went back to the game. The Queen said that if they were late, it would cost them their lives. During the game, the Queen argued with the other players. She shouted, "Off with his head," or "Off with her head." The soldiers took away those she ordered to be killed. Soon, all players except the King, the Queen, and Alice were taken away. Then the Queen said to Alice, "Have you seen the mock turtle yet?" "No," said Alice. "I don't even know what a mock turtle is." "It's the thing mock turtle soup is made from," said the Queen. "I never saw one or heard of one," said Alice. "Come on, then," said the Queen, "and he shall tell you his history." As they walked, Alice heard the King speak softly to everyone. "You are all pardoned." "Come, that's a good thing," she said to herself. She had been unhappy about how many people the Queen ordered to be killed. Soon they saw a griffin. It was sleeping in the sun. "Up, lazy thing," said the Queen, "and take this young lady to see the mock turtle and to hear his history. I must go back and check on some executions I have ordered." She walked away, leaving Alice alone with the griffin. Alice didn't like how the creature looked, but she stayed with it. It was safer than the angry Queen. The griffin sat up and rubbed its eyes. It watched the Queen until she was out of sight. Then it laughed softly. "What fun," said the griffin, half to itself, half to Alice. "What is the fun?" said Alice. "Why, she," said the griffin. "It's all her imagination. They never kill anyone, you know. Come on." "Everybody says 'come on' here," Alice thought. She walked slowly after it. "I never was told what to do so much in all my life. Never." They did not go far before they saw the mock turtle. He sat sad and lonely on a small rock. As they came closer, Alice could hear him sighing. It sounded like his heart would break. She felt sorry for him. "What is his sorrow?" she asked the griffin. The griffin answered almost as before. "It's all his imagination. He hasn't got any sorrow, you know. Come on." So they went to the mock turtle. He looked at them with big eyes full of tears, but said nothing. "This here young lady," said the griffin, "she wants to know your history, she does." "I'll tell it her," said the mock turtle in a deep, empty voice. "Sit down, both of you, and don't speak a word till I've finished." So they sat down. Nobody spoke for some minutes. Alice waited patiently. "Once," said the mock turtle at last with a deep sigh, "I was a real turtle." There was a long silence. The griffin made a sound. "Heck!" The mock turtle kept crying sadly. Alice waited for more. "When we were little," the mock turtle went on at last, more calmly, though still crying a little, "we went to school in the sea. The master was an old turtle. We used to call him Tortoise." "Why did you call him Tortoise if he wasn't one?" Alice asked. "We called him Tortoise because he taught us," said the mock turtle angrily. "Really, you are very dull. You ought to be ashamed of yourself for asking such a simple question," added the griffin. Then they both sat silent and looked at poor Alice. She felt like sinking into the ground. At last the Gryphon said to the Mock Turtle, "Drive on, old fellow, don't be all day about it." And he went on. "Yes, we went to school in the sea, though you may not believe it." "I never said I didn't," interrupted Alice. "You did," said the Mock Turtle. "Hold your tongue," added the Gryphon, before Alice could speak again. The Mock Turtle went on. "We had the best of educations. In fact, we went to school every day." "I've been to a day school, too," said Alice. "You needn't be so proud as all that." "With extras?" asked the Mock Turtle, a little worried. "Yes," said Alice. "We learned French and music." "And washing?" said the Mock Turtle. "Certainly not," said Alice angrily. "Ah, then yours wasn't a really good school," said the Mock Turtle, sounding very relieved. Now at ours, they had at the end of the bill French, music, and washing, extra. "You couldn't have wanted it much," said Alice, "living at the bottom of the sea." "I couldn't afford to learn it," said the Mock Turtle with a sigh. "I only took the regular course." "What was that?" asked Alice. "Reeling and writhing, of course, to begin with, and then the different branches of arithmetic, ambition, distraction, uglification, and derision." "I never heard of uglification," said Alice carefully. "What is it?" The Gryphon lifted up both its paws in surprise. "What? Never heard of uglifying?" it exclaimed. "You know what to beautify is, I suppose." "Yes," said Alice, unsure. "It means to make anything prettier?" "Well, then, if you don't know what to uglify is, you are a simpleton." Alice did not ask more questions. She turned to the Mock Turtle and said, "What else had you to learn?" "Well, there was mystery," the Mock Turtle replied. He counted the subjects on his flippers. "Mystery, old and new, with seaography. Then drawling. The drawling master was an old conger eel. He came once a week. He taught us drawling, stretching, and fainting in coils." "What was that like?" said Alice. "Well, I can't show it you myself," the Mock Turtle said. "I'm too stiff, and the Gryphon never learnt it." "Hadn't time," said the Gryphon. "I went to the classics master, though. He was an old crab, he was." "I never went to him," said the Mock Turtle with a sigh. "He taught laughing and grief, they used to say." "So he did, said the Gryphon, sighing too. Both creatures hid their faces in their paws. "And how many hours a day did you do lessons?" asked Alice. She wanted to change the subject quickly. 10 hours the first day," said the Mock Turtle, 9 the next, and so on. "What a curious plan!" exclaimed Alice. "That's the reason they're called lessons," said the Gryphon, "because they lessen from day to day." "Then the 11th day must have been a holiday?" "Of course it was," said the Mock Turtle. "And how did you manage on the 12th?" Alice went on eagerly. "That's enough about lessons," interrupted the Gryphon in a very firm voice. "Tell her something about the games now." The Mock Turtle sighed. Sobs choked his voice. "Like he hath a bone in his throat," said the Gryphon, shaking his back. At last the Mock Turtle spoke, tears on his cheeks. "You may not have lived much under the sea." "I haven't," said Alice. "And perhaps you never met a lobster." Alice started to say, "I once tasted," but stopped quickly and said, "No, never." So you have no idea what a lovely thing a lobster quadrille is. No, indeed, said Alice. What kind of dance is it? Well, said the Gryphon, first you stand in a line along the seashore. 2 lines, cried the Mock Turtle, seals, turtles, salmon, and so on. Then, when you've moved all the jellyfish away, that usually takes some time, stopped the Gryphon. You step forward twice, each with a lobster as a partner, cried the Gryphon. Of course, the Mock Turtle said. Step forward twice, find partners, change lobsters, and go back in the same way, continued the Gryphon. Then, you know, the Mock Turtle went on, you throw the lobsters, shouted the Gryphon, jumping into the air, as far out to sea as you can. Swim after them, screamed the Gryphon. Turn a somersault in the sea, cried the Mock Turtle, jumping wildly. Change lobsters again, yelled the Gryphon loudly. Back to land again, and that's the first part, said the Mock Turtle, dropping his voice. The 2 creatures who had been jumping sat down sadly and looked at Alice. It must be a very pretty dance, said Alice shyly. Would you like to see a little of it? Said the Mock Turtle. Very much, said Alice. Come, let's try the first part, said the Mock Turtle to the Gryphon. We can dance without lobsters, you know. Who will sing? Oh, you sing, said the Gryphon. I've forgotten the words. So they began dancing around Alice, sometimes stepping on her toes, waving their paws. The Mock Turtle sang, slowly and sadly. Will you walk a little faster? Said a whiting to a snail. There's a porpoise close behind us, and he's treading on my tail. See how eagerly the lobsters and the turtles all advance. They are waiting on the shingle. Will you come and join the dance? Will you, won't you, will you, won't you, will you join the dance? Will you, won't you, will you, won't you join the dance? You can really have no notion how delightful it will be when they take us up and throw us with the lobsters out to sea. But the snail replied, too far, and gave a look askance. Said he thanked the whiting kindly, but he would not join the dance. Would not, could not, would not, could not, would not join the dance. Would not, could not, would not, could not, would not join the dance. What matters it how far we go? His scaly friend replied. There is another shore, you know, upon the other side. The further off from England, the nearer is to France. Then turn not pale, beloved snail, but come and join the dance. Will you, won't you, will you, won't you, will you join the dance? Will you, won't you, will you, won't you, will you join the dance? Thank you. It's an interesting dance to watch, said Alice, feeling glad it was over. And I like that strange song about the whiting. Oh, about the whiting, said the Mock Turtle. You've seen them, right? Yes, said Alice. I've often seen them at dinner. She stopped quickly. I don't know where Din may be, said the Mock Turtle, but if you've seen them so often, of course you know what they're like. I think so, Alice replied thoughtfully. They have their tails in their mouths, and they're all over crumbs. You're wrong about the crumbs, said the Mock Turtle. Crumbs would wash off in the sea, but they do have their tails in their mouths, and the reason is— Here the Mock Turtle yawned. Tell her about the reason, he said to the Gryphon. The reason is, said the Gryphon, that they wanted to go with the lobsters to the dance, so they got thrown out to sea, so they had to fall a long way, so their tails got stuck in their mouths, so they couldn't get them out again. That's all. Thank you, said Alice. It's very interesting. I never knew so much about a whiting before. I can tell you more than that, if you like, said the Gryphon. Do you know why it's called a whiting? I never thought about it, said Alice. Why? It does the boots and shoes, the Gryphon replied seriously. Alice was confused. Does the boots and shoes, she repeated, surprised. Why, what makes your shoes shine? Said the Gryphon. I mean, what makes them so shiny? Alice looked down and thought before she answered. They're done with blacking, I think. Boots and shoes under the sea, the Gryphon went on in a deep voice, are done with a whiting. Now you know. And what are they made of? Alice asked, curious. Soles and eels, of course, the Gryphon replied rather impatiently. Any shrimp could have told you that. If I'd been the whiting, said Alice, who was still thinking about the song, I'd have said to the porpoise, stay back, please, we don't want you with us. They had to have him with them, the Mock Turtle said. No smart fish would go anywhere without a porpoise. Really? Said Alice, very surprised. Of course not, said the Mock Turtle. Why, if a fish came to me and told me he was going on a trip, I would say, with what porpoise? Don't you mean purpose? Said Alice. I mean what I say, the Mock Turtle replied angrily, and the Gryphon added, Come, let's hear some of your adventures. I could tell you my adventures starting from this morning, said Alice timidly, but there's no use going back to yesterday because I was a different person then. Explain all that, said the Mock Turtle. No, no, the adventures first, said the Gryphon impatiently. Explanations take such a long time. So Alice began telling them her adventures from when she first saw the White Rabbit. She was nervous at first. The two creatures got close, one on each side, with very wide eyes and mouths, but she gained courage as she went on. Her listeners were quiet till she got to the part about her repeating, You are old, Father William, to the caterpillar, and the words all coming different. Then the Mock Turtle drew a long breath and said, That's very curious. It's all about as curious as it can be, said the Gryphon. It all came different, the Mock Turtle repeated thoughtfully. I would like to hear her try and say something now. Tell her to start. He looked at the Gryphon as if it thought it had some kind of authority over Alice. Stand up and repeat, "'Tis the voice of the sluggard," said the Gryphon. How the creatures order one about and make one repeat lessons, thought Alice. I might as well be at school at once. However, she got up and began to repeat it, but her head was so full of the Lobster Quadrille that she hardly knew what she was saying, and the words came very queer indeed. "'Tis the voice of the lobster, I heard him declare, You have baked me too brown, I must sugar my hair. As a duck with its eyelids, so he with his nose trims his belt and his buttons and turns out his toes." "That's different from what I used to say when I was a child," said the Gryphon. "Well, I never heard it before," said the Mock Turtle, "but it sounds very silly." Alice said nothing. She had sat down with her face in her hands, wondering if anything would ever happen in a natural way again. "I should like to have it explained," said the Mock Turtle. "She can't explain it," said the Gryphon quickly. "Go on with the next part." "But about his toes," the Mock Turtle persisted. "How could he turn them out with his nose, you know?" "It's the first position in dancing," Alice said, but was dreadfully puzzled by the whole thing and longed to change the subject. "Go on with the next part," the Gryphon impatiently repeated. It begins, "I passed by his garden and marked with one eye." Alice did not dare to disobey, though she felt sure it would all come wrong, and she went on in a trembling voice. "I passed by his garden and marked with one eye how the owl and the panther were sharing a pie." What is the use of saying all that if you don't explain it as you go on? It's the most confusing thing I've ever heard. "Yes, I think you'd better stop," said the Gryphon. Alice was only too glad to do so. "Shall we try another part of the Lobster Quadrille?" the Gryphon went on. "Or would you like the Mock Turtle to sing you a song?" "Oh, a song, please, if the Mock Turtle would be so kind," Alice replied, so eagerly that the Gryphon said in a rather offended tone, "Huh, no accounting for tastes. Sing her Turtle Soup, will you, old friend?" The Mock Turtle sighed. He began, his voice sometimes choked with sobs, to sing this: "Beautiful soup, so rich and green, waiting in a hot tureen. Who for such tasty food would not want? Soup of the evening, beautiful soup. Soup of the evening, beautiful soup. Beautiful soup. Beautiful soup. Soup of the evening. Beautiful, beautiful soup." "Sing the chorus again," cried the Gryphon. The Mock Turtle had just started to repeat it when a cry of "The trial's beginning" was heard far away. "Come on," cried the Gryphon. It took Alice by the hand and hurried off, not waiting for the end of the song. "What trial is it?" Alice panted as she ran, but the Gryphon only answered, "Come on," and ran faster. More faintly on the breeze that followed them came the melancholy words, "Soup of the evening, beautiful soup." The King and Queen of Hearts sat on their throne when Alice arrived. Many people and animals were there, along with all the playing cards. The knave stood in front of them, in chains. 2 soldiers guarded him. Near the king was the White Rabbit, holding a trumpet and a scroll. In the middle of the room was a table with many tarts. They looked so good that Alice felt hungry. "I wish they would finish the trial," she thought, "and give us the food." But it did not look like that would happen, so Alice looked around to pass the time. Alice had never been in a court before, but she had read about them. She was happy to know the names of many things there. "That's the judge," she told herself, because of his big wig. The king was the judge. He wore his crown over his wig. He did not look comfortable, and it did not look good on him. "And that's the jury box," Alice thought. "And those 12 creatures, some were animals, some were birds. I think they are the jurors." She felt proud because she knew this word. The 12 jurors were writing on slates. "What are they doing?" whispered Alice to the Gryphon. "The trial has not started yet." "They are writing their names," whispered the Gryphon. "They don't want to forget them later." "Stupid things," Alice said loudly, but she stopped quickly. The White Rabbit cried, "Silence in the court!" The king put on his glasses and looked around to see who was talking. Alice could see that all the jurors were writing "stupid things" on their slates. One juror did not know how to spell stupid. He asked his neighbor for help. "Their slates will be a mess before the trial ends," Alice thought. One juror had a pencil that made a squeaking sound. Alice did not like this. She went behind him and quickly took the pencil. The poor juror, it was Bill the lizard, could not find it. He had to write with his finger for the rest of the day, but his finger made no mark on the slate. "Herald, read the accusation," said the king. The White Rabbit blew his trumpet 3 times. Then he unrolled the scroll and read, "The Queen of Hearts, she made some tarts, all on a summer day. The Knave of Hearts, he stole those tarts and took them quite away." "Now, decide if he is guilty," the king told the jury. "Not yet, not yet," the rabbit quickly said. "There is more to do first." "Call the first witness," said the king. The White Rabbit blew his trumpet again and called, "First witness." The first witness was the Hatter. He came in with a teacup and a piece of bread and butter. "Excuse me, Your Majesty," he said. "I brought these because I was not finished with my tea when you called me." "You should have finished. When did you start?" The Hatter looked at the March Hare, who came in with him, and the Dormouse. "March 14th, I think," he said. "15th," said the March Hare. "16th," added the Dormouse. "Write that down," the king told the jury. The jury quickly wrote all 3 dates on their slates. "Take off your hat," the king told the Hatter. "It isn't mine." "Stolen," the king cried, looking at the jury. They quickly wrote this down. "I sell hats. I don't have my own hats. I'm a hatter." The queen put on her glasses, and she stared at the Hatter. He turned pale and moved nervously. "Tell us what you know," said the king. "Don't be nervous, or I will have you killed right now." This did not help the Hatter. He moved his feet, looking at the queen. He was so confused that he bit his teacup instead of his bread and butter. Just then, Alice felt something strange. She was growing bigger again. At first, she thought she would leave the court, but then she decided to stay as long as there was room. "Please don't squeeze so much," said the Dormouse, who sat next to her. "I can hardly breathe." "I can't stop it," Alice said gently. "I'm growing." "You can't grow here," said the Dormouse. "Don't talk nonsense," Alice said more strongly. "You are growing too." "Yes, but I grow at a normal speed, not in that silly way." He got up sadly and moved to the other side of the court. The queen kept staring at the Hatter. As the Dormouse moved, she said to an officer, "Bring me the list of singers from the last concert." The poor Hatter shook so much that both his shoes fell off. "Tell us what you know," said the king, very angry, "or I will have you killed even if you are nervous." "I'm a poor man, Your Majesty," the Hatter began, his voice shaking, "and I hadn't begun my tea, not above a week or so, and what with the bread and butter getting so thin and the twinkling of the tea." "The twinkling of the what?" said the king. "It began with the tea," the Hatter answered. "Of course twinkling begins with a T," said the king quickly. "Do you think I am stupid? Go on." "I'm a poor man," the Hatter continued, "and most things twinkled after that, only the March Hare said—" "I didn't," the March Hare quickly interrupted. "You did," said the Hatter. "I deny it," said the March Hare. "He denies it," said the king. "Do not say that part." "Well, anyway, the Dormouse said," the Hatter went on, looking around to see if the Dormouse would deny it, but the Dormouse said nothing. He was fast asleep. "After that," the Hatter continued, "I cut some more bread and butter." "But what did the Dormouse say?" one of the jury asked. "I can't remember that," said the Hatter. "You must remember," said the king, "or I will have you killed." The unhappy hatter dropped his teacup and bread and butter. He fell to one knee. "I'm a poor man, your majesty," he began. "You are a very poor speaker," said the king. One of the guinea pigs cheered. The officers of the court quickly stopped it. "I'm glad I saw that," Alice thought. "I often read in the newspaper, 'Applause was stopped by the officers.' Now I know what it means." "If that is all you know, you can step down," the king continued. "I can't go lower," said the hatter. "I'm already on the floor." "Then you may sit down," the king replied. The other guinea pig cheered and was stopped. "Good. No more guinea pigs," Alice thought. "Now we can move on." "I would rather finish my tea," said the hatter, looking at the queen. She was reading the list of singers. "You may go," said the king. The hatter quickly left the court. He did not even wait to put on his shoes. "And just cut off his head outside," said the queen to an officer, but the hatter was gone before the officer reached the door. "Call the next witness," said the king. The next witness was the duchess's cook. She carried a pepper box. Alice knew it was the cook because people near the door started sneezing. "Tell us what you know," said the king. "Shan't." The king looked at the white rabbit. The rabbit said softly, "Your Majesty must question this witness." "Well, if I must, I must," the king said sadly. He folded his arms and frowned at the cook. Then he said in a deep voice, "What are tarts made of?" "Pepper, mostly," said the cook. "Treacle," said a sleepy voice behind her. "Catch that dormouse," the queen yelled. "Cut off that dormouse's head. Get that dormouse out of court. Stop him, pinch him, pull off his whiskers." For some minutes the court was a mess. They tried to get the dormouse out. When they were quiet again, the cook was gone. "Never mind," said the king, feeling happy. "Call the next witness." He told the queen quietly, "My dear, you must question the next witness. My head hurts." Alice watched the white rabbit look at his list. She was curious about the next witness. They don't have much proof yet, she thought. Imagine her surprise when the white rabbit read out in his loud voice the name Alice. "Here!" cried Alice, quite forgetting in the flurry of the moment how large she had grown in the last few minutes. She jumped up in such a hurry that she tipped over the jury box with the edge of her skirt. This made all the jurymen fall onto the heads of the crowd below. There they lay sprawling about on the ground. They looked a bit like a group of small, colorful fish, which reminded her very much of a globe of goldfish she had accidentally upset the week before. Their small, round bodies were scattered everywhere, and some made little noises of surprise. "Oh, I beg your pardon!" she exclaimed in a tone of great dismay. Her voice was full of regret. She began picking them up again as quickly as she could. The accident of the goldfish kept running in her head, making her feel urgent. She had a vague sort of idea that they must be collected at once and put back into the jury box, or they would die, just like the goldfish might have if she hadn't put them back in their bowl. "The trial cannot proceed," said the king in a very grave voice. His voice was serious and deep. "Until all the jurymen are back in their proper places. All," he repeated with great emphasis, making sure everyone heard him clearly. He looked hard at Alice as he said so, his eyes fixed on her. Alice looked at the jury box. She saw that in her haste she had put the lizard in head downwards. The poor little thing was waving its tail about in a melancholy way, moving it slowly and sadly. It was quite unable to move the rest of its body. She soon got it out again, gently pulling it free, and put it right side up. Not that it signifies much, she said to herself, thinking it probably didn't matter a great deal. I should think it would be quite as much use in the trial one way up as the other. As soon as the jury had a little recovered from the shock of being upset, they slowly got back to their seats. Their slates and pencils had been found and handed back to them. They set to work very diligently to write out a history of the accident. They wrote with serious faces, their pencils making soft scratching sounds on their slates. All of them wrote, except the lizard, who seemed too much overcome by the fall to do anything. It just sat with its mouth open, gazing up into the roof of the court, looking a little dazed. "What do you know about this business?" the king said to Alice. He looked at her with a questioning gaze. "Nothing," said Alice. Her voice was clear. "Nothing whatever?" persisted the king, pressing her for more information. "Nothing whatever," said Alice firmly. "That's very important," said the king, turning to the jury. He nodded his head as if he had heard something truly special. They were just beginning to write this down on their slates. Their pencils were poised, ready to note the king's words, when the White Rabbit interrupted. "Unimportant, Your Majesty means, of course," he said in a very respectful tone, bowing slightly, but he was frowning and making faces at the king as he spoke, showing his true feelings. "Unimportant, of course, I meant," the king quickly said. He quickly changed his mind. He went on to himself in an undertone, speaking so quietly that only he could hear. "Important, unimportant, unimportant, important," as if he were trying which words sounded best, testing them out in his mind. Some of the jury wrote it down important, following the king's first word, and some wrote unimportant, following his corrected word. Alice could see this as she was near enough to look over their slates. She saw the different words on their small black boards. But it doesn't matter a bit, she thought to herself, realizing the jury was quite confused. At this moment, the king, who had been for some time busily writing in his notebook, making quick notes, cackled out, "Silence!" He read out from his book in a loud voice, "Rule 42. All persons more than a mile high to leave the court." Everybody looked at Alice. Their eyes all turned to her as she was very tall. "I'm not a mile high," said Alice. She felt a little annoyed. "You are," said the king, pointing a finger at her. "Nearly 2 miles high," added the queen, her voice sharp and sure. "Well, I shan't go at any rate," said Alice, shaking her head. "Besides, that's not a regular rule. You invented it just now." She knew it was not a real rule from the book. "It's the oldest rule in the book," said the king, trying to sound firm. "Then it ought to be number 1, said Alice, pointing out the flaw in his logic. The king turned pale. His face lost all its color. He shut his notebook hastily, snapping it shut with a loud sound. "Consider your verdict," he said to the jury in a low, trembling voice. His voice was shaky and quiet. "There's more evidence to come yet, please your majesty," said the White Rabbit, jumping up in a great hurry. He was very excited. "This paper has just been picked up." He held a piece of paper in his hand. "What's in it?" said the queen, her eyes wide with curiosity. "I haven't opened it yet," said the White Rabbit, "but it seems to be a letter written by the prisoner to somebody." He looked closely at the folded paper. "It must have been that," said the king, nodding his head, "unless it was written to nobody, which isn't usual, you know." He thought it was clear. "Who is it directed to?" asked one of the jurymen, trying to understand. "It isn't directed at all," said the White Rabbit. "In fact, there's nothing written on the outside." He unfolded the paper as he spoke, showing the blank cover. He added, "It isn't a letter after all, it's a set of verses." He revealed the writing inside. "Are they in the prisoner's handwriting?" asked another of the jurymen. He wanted to know if the knave had written them. "No, they're not," said the White Rabbit, "and that's the queerest thing about it." The jury all looked puzzled, their faces showing confusion. "He must have imitated somebody else's hand," said the king, thinking he had solved the mystery. The jury all brightened up again, understanding a little better. "Please, Your Majesty," said the knave, speaking clearly, "I didn't write it, and they can't prove I did. There's no name signed at the end." He tried to defend himself. "If you didn't sign it," said the king, his voice growing stern, "that only makes the matter worse. You must have meant some mischief, or else you'd have signed your name like an honest man." There was a general clapping of hands at this. The crowd and the cards clapped their hands, making a loud noise. It was the first really clever thing the king had said that day. "That proves his guilt," said the queen, quite pleased. "It proves nothing of the sort," said Alice loudly. "Why, you don't even know what they're about." She thought it was silly. "Read them," said the king, ordering the White Rabbit to continue. The White Rabbit put on his spectacles, pushing them up his nose. "Where shall I begin, please, Your Majesty?" he asked, looking unsure. "Begin at the beginning," the king said gravely, his voice serious, "and go on till you come to the end, then stop." These were the verses the White Rabbit read. "They told me you had been to her, and mentioned me to him. She gave me a good character, but said I could not swim. He sent them word I had not gone. We know it to be true. If she should push the matter on, what would become of you? I gave her 1, they gave him 2, you gave us 3 or more. They all returned from him to you, though they were mine before. If I or she should chance to be involved in this affair, he trusts to you to set them free, exactly as we were. My notion was that you had been, before she had this fit, an obstacle that came between him and ourselves and it. Don't let him know she liked them best, for this must ever be a secret kept from all the rest between yourself and me." "That's the most important piece of evidence we've heard yet," said the king, rubbing his hands together with satisfaction. "So now let the jury, if any of them can explain it," said Alice, interrupting him. She had grown so large in the last few minutes that she wasn't a bit afraid of interrupting him now. "I'll give him 6pence. I don't believe there's an atom of meaning in it." She thought the verses made no sense at all. The jury all wrote down on their slates, "She doesn't believe there's an atom of meaning in it," copying Alice's words. But none of them attempted to explain the paper. They just looked at it, confused. "If there's no meaning in it, that saves a world of trouble, you know, as we needn't try to find any." He sounded relieved. "And yet I don't know," he went on, spreading out the verses on his knee, looking at them with one eye, as if trying to see something hidden. "I seem to see some meaning in them after all. Said I could not swim. You can't swim, can you?" he added, turning to the knave. The knave shook his head sadly. "Do I look like it?" he said, which he certainly did not, being made entirely of cardboard. He would sink immediately. "All right so far," said the king, pleased with his discovery. He went on muttering over the verses to himself, softly repeating the lines. "We know it to be true," that's the jury, of course. "I gave her 1, they gave him 2. Why, that must be what he did with the tarts, you know." He looked very clever. "But it goes on, they all returned from him to you," said Alice, pointing out the next line. "Why, there they are," said the king triumphantly, his face lighting up. He pointed to the tarts on the table. "Nothing can be clearer than that. Then again, before she had this fit, you never had fits, my dear, I think," he said to the queen, asking her directly. "Never," said the queen furiously. She threw an inkstand at the lizard as she spoke, sending the ink flying. The unfortunate little Bill had left off writing on his slate with one finger, as he found it made no mark, but he now hastily began again, using the ink that was trickling down his face as long as it lasted. It was quite a mess. "Then the words don't fit you," said the king, looking round the court with a smile. He thought he had made a very clever joke. There was a dead silence. No one laughed. "It's a pun," the king added in an offended tone, explaining his joke. Everybody laughed then, trying to please him. "Let the jury consider their verdict," the king said, for about the 20th time that day. He wanted the trial to end. "No, no," said the queen. She was very impatient. "Sentence first, verdict afterwards." "Stuff and nonsense," said Alice loudly. She could not believe what she was hearing. The idea of having the sentence first. "Hold your tongue," said the queen, turning purple with anger. Her face became a dark red. "I won't," said Alice, refusing to be quiet. "Off with her head," the queen shouted at the top of her voice. Her voice was very loud and angry. Nobody moved. The guards stood still. "Who cares for you?" said Alice. She had grown to her full size by this time, as tall as the trees. She was not afraid. "You're nothing but a pack of cards." At this, the whole pack of cards rose up into the air. They floated above her head. Then they came flying down upon her like a storm of paper. She gave a little scream, half of fright and half of anger. She tried to beat them off, waving her hands, and then she found herself lying on the bank with her head in the lap of her sister. Her sister was gently brushing away some dead leaves that had fluttered down from the trees upon her face. The sun felt warm on her skin. "Wake up, Alice dear," said her sister, her voice soft and kind. "Why, what a long sleep you've had." "Oh, I've had such a curious dream," said Alice. Her eyes were still wide. She told her sister, as well as she could remember them, all these strange adventures of hers that you have just been reading about. She spoke of the White Rabbit, the Mad Hatter, the Queen of Hearts, and all the crazy things that had happened. And when she had finished, her sister kissed her. She said, "It was a curious dream, dear, certainly, but now run into your tea. It's getting late." So Alice got up and ran off. She thought while she ran, as well she might, what a wonderful dream it had been. It was full of magic and strange creatures. But her sister sat still just as Alice left her. She leaned her head on her hand, resting her chin. She watched the setting sun as its orange and pink light filled the sky. She thought of little Alice and all her wonderful adventures. She thought of the funny characters and the strange places. She remembered the thrilling chases and the puzzling conversations. She thought of these things until she too began dreaming after a fashion right there by the river. And this was her dream. First, she dreamed of little Alice herself. Once again, the tiny hands were clasped upon her knee, resting there softly. The bright, eager eyes were looking up into hers, full of wonder. She could hear the very tones of Alice's voice, clear and sweet. She could see that queer little toss of her head to keep back the wandering hair that would always get into her eyes, a small, familiar movement. And still as she listened, or seemed to listen, the whole place around her became alive with the strange creatures of her little sister's dream. The air seemed to shimmer with them. The long grass rustled softly at her feet as the white rabbit hurried by, his watch in his hand, looking worried. The frightened mouse splashed his way through the neighboring pool, making small ripples in the water. She could hear the rattle of the teacups, a merry clinking sound, as the March Hare and his friends shared their never-ending meal, always having tea. She heard the shrill voice of the Queen, sharp and loud, ordering off her unfortunate guests to execution, a terrible command. Once more, the pig baby was sneezing on the Duchess's knee, making loud achoo sounds, while plates and dishes crashed around it, falling and breaking. Once more, the shriek of the griffin, a high, wild cry, the squeaking of the lizard's slate pencil, a thin scratching sound, and the choking of the suppressed guinea pigs, small, muffled sounds, filled the air. These noises mixed up with the distant, sad sobs of the miserable mock turtle, a sound of deep sorrow. So she sat on with closed eyes, feeling as if she was there. She half believed herself in Wonderland, truly present among the strange sights and sounds. Though she knew she had but to open them again, and all would change to dull reality. The magic would disappear. The grass would be only rustling in the wind, a simple natural sound, and the pool would be rippling to the waving of the reeds, just calm water moving. The rattling teacups would change to tinkling sheep bells, making a soft, clear sound from the fields, and the Queen's shrill cries would change to the voice of the shepherd boy calling his sheep in the distance. And the sneeze of the baby, the shriek of the griffin, and all the other queer noises would change, she knew, to the confused clamor of the busy farmyard, a mix of many animal sounds, while the lowing of the cattle in the distance, a deep, slow sound, would take the place of the mock turtle's heavy sobs, ending the sadness. Lastly, she pictured to herself how this same little sister of hers would, in the aftertime, in many years from now, be herself a grown woman. She imagined Alice older and wiser, and how she would keep through all her riper years, through all her adult life, the simple and loving heart of her childhood. She would stay kind and full of wonder, and how she would gather about her other little children, perhaps her own, telling them stories. She would make their eyes bright and eager with many a strange tale, perhaps even with the dream of Wonderland of long ago, sharing the magic she had known. And how she would feel with all their simple sorrows, understanding their small hurts, and she would find a pleasure in all their simple joys, delighting in their happiness, remembering her own child life and the happy summer days she spent with her sister by the river. The end. Thank you for spending time with us. I hope this story brought you peace and reflection. We will see you soon.